Yeah, hi there, Braydon, and this is Michael. I'm taking a look at your essay. So I'm going to qualify any changes I make. I am not in your class. I don't have exactly the structure of the assignment that your professor or teacher is looking for. So I'm just going to focus on editing your essay, right? So you have to worry about the structure of it. But I will comment on some concerns. Your second paragraph is really long. That bothers me a little bit. Paragraphs typically are between 50 and 150 words. So if you're doing an interpretation, which is you're arguing a certain theme that you think is present within the book, then you probably want to break your paragraphs into smaller ideas. That would be part of what I'm looking at. So I'm not exactly sure what it is you want me to do. You said I need it to be structured correctly and to flow smoothly. So I'm just going to edit. Okay? So here we go. Women's will maybe get rid of that. Just say always exceeds. Society's ideals in the Victorian age did not favor women's independence. Women took subjugated societal roles. And they. If you want to have good parallel structure here, you have a subject, society's ideals, you have women, and then they. So you're using the word and to join three different independent clauses together. The proto-feminist ideal reflected by Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre is manifested through symbolism because throughout her life Jane would demonstrate independent thoughts and growing individualism. Jane does. It's really weird though. Your teacher wants you to put the thesis kind of in the middle of that paragraph, and to me that is so confusing. But I'm just going to let it go. Jane does become equal to Mr. Rochester, first as a governess with the courage to express her ideals, then eventually as his fiancée and equal. Jane develops confidence and trust in herself through life's experiences, her moral steadfastness, and the sacrifices that would help mold her into the person she would become. Now here it says, first comment from Mrs. Godesich, please revise. So I don't know what that means. I'm just going to keep going. Mr. Rochester continually confronts Jane about her actions and questions her ideals, causing Jane to question herself, but also to become strong and to ultimately strengthen her resolve in her own decisions. Thus, Jane remaining true to her ideals and beliefs. So you want to put a comma here. Jane remaining true to her ideals and beliefs becomes the true proto-feminist, which ultimately results in Mr. Rochester treating her as an equal and as a perfect soulmate for his own strong, independent soul. Jane is eventually forced to make her moral decision to live a comfortable life and venture out on her own. The resulting adversity causes Jane to question her understanding of her beliefs and commitment. However, Jane does develop, through her troubled existence, the ability to rise above the troubled waters and gain strength with each of the adverse events in her life. It is important to always consider Jane's independent nature, which has a strong influence on how she will eventually react. You want to say here react because you have will, so how we'll eventually react to different situations. All right, let's go to the next one again. So you have the next paragraph. As a young orphan girl, teacher, and governess, Bronte's protagonist, Jane Eyre, grows up in the Victorian age, learning to become an independent young lady, ultimately achieves maturity in her own consciousness and the situations happening around her. As a young orphan, she was often subjected to abuse and neglect. As a young girl, Jane was despised and treated unkindly by Mrs. Reed. Excuse me. Get rid of that comma there. And often abused by her son, John. Accustomed to John Reed's abuse, I never had an idea of replying to it. My care was how to endure the blow which would certainly follow the insult. Yeah, this doesn't really fit with anything, though. Let me look. That might work. As a young girl, Jane was despised and treated unkindly by Mrs. Reed and often abused by her son John, which is evident when she says, however, Jane wanted to be more and had the self-drive to reach this is probably don't need to say all that. Jane had the self-drive to reach for more in life. During her stay at Lowood, under less than desirable circumstances, Jane made the decision to gain the best education that she could. Don't need a comma here. To better herself and to prove that she was better than what everyone thought. And said about her, she stated, I resolved in the depth of my heart that I would be most moderate, most correct, and having reflected a few minutes in order to arrange coherently what I had to say. This statement shows the strength of her thoughts, a determination to overcome things that were wrong, and understand that society's caste system was not the true boundaries of anyone's soul. Be it a woman's or a man's position in the world. Yeah, I guess you could probably use a comma there. Jane saw the true character of the individual she was. Let's try this. Jane saw the true character of the individual she was and those with whom she came into contact. When Jane first meets the aristocracy that come into Thornbury Hall, she notes her high regard for them. She notes their high regard for themselves, but also notes their true character. You can probably put this and then introduce it, and that would probably work. Most people would have termed her a splendid woman of her age, and so she was, no doubt physically speaking, but then there was an expression of almost insupportable haughtiness in her bearing. A crimson velvet robe and a shawl turban of some gold-wrought Indian fabric invested her, I suppose she thought, with a truly imperial dignity. There were really no good or evil individuals, rich or poor, upper class or commoners. Put a semicolon here. Everyone had the potential to become something special in the world. Just say regardless. Believe it or not, irregardless is not a word. It really isn't. That's why it was underlined in red. Regardless of their economic status. Everyone is singular, so let's just get rid of the word there so you don't have a pronoun agreement issue, regardless of economic status. In all circumstances. She would take her time and make an intelligent response. Okay, in all circumstances, she would take her time and make an intelligent response formed by her education and experiences. And honest in its context of the realities around her. Something's not quite right here. She would take her time to make an intelligent response. Formed by her education and experiences. Which were honest in their context to the realities around her. I don't know. You got to kind of look at that. The question is, what does honest refer to? Does it refer to experiences in education? Wait a minute. The response, I think this is what you're saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. She would take her time to make an intelligent response. The intelligent response was formed by her education and experiences. The intelligent response was honest in its context to the realities around her. Am I right? So then we can say she would take her time to make an intelligent response formed by her education and experiences, which was honest in its context to the realities around her. That might be a little bit better. It says saying, and this was not common amongst the women of that age, since they're regularly treated and thought of as less inferior. Let's say this was not common amongst the women of that age, since they were regularly treated and thought of as inferior to men and without any independent judgment or intellect, especially once they were married. Now, I'm not sure what this means. Second comment says, please revise. You guys, Braydon, it's not Pearlie, it's not me, you. It's your thought, your thinking. You're the one who has to make these revisions based on what your teacher is telling you. So that's your responsibility there. So it said, Jane recognized opportunities existed in her world, but one had to work for it. Jane understood that a basic commitment to honesty, especially to oneself, would always be required of people who wanted to be content. So you got Jane explains. But how does this idea relate to what you were previously saying? So let's look at the quote. During these 8 years, my life was uniform but not unhappy. Because it was not inactive, I had the means of an excellent education placed within my reach, a fondness for some of my studies, and a desire to excel in all. I availed myself fully of the advantages offered me. In time, I rose to the first fight of the first class. Then I was invested with the office of teacher. You can probably tie this idea needs to be tied to the previous idea. You just talked about how her basic commitment is honesty, and she would require it of people who wanted to be happy, right? So that signal phrase Jane explains, maybe say something else in there that connects that to the previous idea. You see, understanding that her future was not limited by society's rules, Jane was determined to gain knowledge and rise above the gender prejudices and narrow-minded thinking of her age. It was unusual in that time period for women to strive to gain advancement in society, but Jane understood that. She was going to be happy. She had to follow her principles and speak her mind. Okay, let's keep going here. For this was her way to escape the man-made oppression she was continually faced with. I want to make this a little more formal. You could do that. Okay, let's see what we have here. Subject to change, work in progress. Jane begins her career as a governess. Let's put this here. As a young and inexperienced governess, but confident in her knowledge and skills she acquired during her younger years. She had learned to rely on her own thoughts, skills, and judgments. This confidence continues to grow through her challenging conversations and interactions with Mr. Rochester. Jane's growth revolves around her ideals about self-respect, she sticks to her ideals and is uncomfortable in being fully dependent on someone. She immediately tries to figure out a way to be equal so equal to Mr. Rochester. In Bronte Jane Eyre, Jane states, it would indeed be a relief. Jane Cooley shows her resolve to be independent in her interactions with everyone she interacts with. She is thought of by her acquaintances as a special girl, different from most young ladies of her age. Due to unexpected circumstances, Jane has to make a moral decision which causes her to become utterly destitute and at the mercy of the world. Jane was not afraid of trials as long as she knew she was doing what was right. Once she settled on her path, she would rely on herself. Once she settled on her path, she would rely on herself to make it through the stormy periods in her life. Jane was the one who would exercise her free will in this life. Jane was able to secure work as a schoolmistress, where she was able to show her skills and improve the lives of the poor children in the area. In addition, Jane becomes a part of the family she was living with because Jane was recognized as being independent and exceptional in the decisions she was making. Recognized by St. John as being remarkable in her talents and behavior, this is a misplaced modifier. Jane is asked by St. John to become his missionary partner. This is evident in his statement to Jane. St. John believes that Jane is equal to the task of going with him and living this type of harsh life, since she is now the equal of any man, but this is not Jane's fate anymore. Put a comma here, for now she realizes she is truly independent. And says, we didn't eat, Cade.
Add a pizza cup.
No.
One more pizza.
And says, quote, no, sir, I'm an independent woman now. I told you I'm independent. Her decisions are now her own. She will choose the life that she wants. Jane follows her heart and returns to Mr. Rochester. When she and Mr. Rochester reunited, Jane has become the master and is in control of both of their destinies. Mr. Rochester realizes that any decision made will be decided by Jane Eyre in the course of their discussions on marriage. Maybe say something like that. In the course of their discussions on marriage, Jane takes the lead. Mr. Rochester declares Jane about his second marriage proposal. Okay. Maybe put a comma here. Which clearly shows that Jane is now equal to Mr. Rochester and her determination. Yes.
I want my pizza cuddle. You not no to me.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which clearly shows that Jane is now equal to Mr. Rochester, and her determination has made her independent.
And okay, you don't want to get it, but you am.
Maybe say that. I think we got it. So which clearly shows that Jane is now equal to Mr. Rochester and that her determination has made her independent. In the final analysis, Jane realized now wait a minute. You got to check your verbs here. You have realizes here and realized here. So you're shifting from the present to the past. So go through the essay one more time, Braydon, and make sure you're keeping everything consistent. So Jane realizes at a very young age that her life well, if you say past here, then past. So realize her life would be defined by her ability to understand through education and a realization of her ideals that she had more to offer in this life than what the Victorian expectations allowed. Jane was able to understand that she was not confined by the rules defined by society. Jane defined herself as an individual with her own thoughts and her own beliefs, and thus Jane began to become her true self with no restrictions. She began to symbolize an independent and free individual regardless of her sex. Jane would never have been truly happy in her life if she had not obtained this equality. All right, so you're getting there. So this idea of independence, and I think is what you're trying to say in this essay. So in terms of the organization, I'm going to leave that to you. I made a few more corrections in here you can take a look at. All right?